South Carolina, 1861. A grand plantation house lit up the night like a symbol of untouchable power, until, in one terrifying blaze, it was reduced to ashes. The fire wasn't an accident. It was an act of rebellion, carried out by someone history tried to erase, a slave who dared to strike back at the very heart of her master's world. She didn't just light a fire. She vanished into the smoke, leaving behind questions that echo to this day. Who was she? And how did she disappear without a trace? If stories like this grip you as much as they gripped us while uncovering them, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves history's hidden chapters. Let's dive in together. The night was thick with the heavy air of a South Carolina summer in 1861. Cicadas hummed. The fields were still, and the grand plantation house, known simply as the Big House, stood as it always had, towering over everything around it. Its white columns gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a constant reminder of wealth, power, and ownership. For the enslaved men and women forced to labor here, it was more than a home for their master. It was a monument to their suffering. Then, somewhere deep in the stillness, came the faintest flicker of orange. At first no one noticed. A curtain caught. A floorboard hissed. Within minutes, flames leapt through windows, clawing their way into the night sky. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Wood cracked and split, glass shattered, and smoke rolled over the plantation like a storm. The Big House, that symbol of dominance, was suddenly fragile, consumed in minutes by the very element it was built to withstand. Panic erupted. White families rushed into the yard, their shouts mixing with the screams of children and the chaos of desperate hands throwing water that only fueled the blaze. Enslaved people were ordered to form bucket lines, but many hesitated, eyes fixed not on saving the house, but on the flames that danced like a forbidden victory. And in the midst of it all, one figure was absent. The woman who set the blaze, the enslaved woman who had struck this blow, was gone. While the fire lit up the night for miles, she seemed to vanish into the smoke, leaving nothing but whispers, terror, and a question that would haunt her master's world. How could she simply disappear? Chapter 2. The Big House. To understand the impact of the fire, we first have to understand what the Big House meant in the South of 1861. It wasn't just a home. It was a performance, a stage set to remind everyone, from visiting neighbors to the enslaved laborers who walked its steps, of who held power. The Big House was built to impress. Wide porches stretched out like open arms, but they weren't welcoming. They were barriers, reminders of who belonged inside and who would never be allowed past the threshold except to serve. Tall white columns weren't just architectural choices. They were deliberate symbols of wealth, often modeled after Greek temples to give an air of grandeur, even divinity. To those who lived in bondage on the plantation, the Big House was the physical embodiment of their oppression. Inside, every room reinforced the divide. Fine china imported from Europe, heavy furniture crafted by enslaved carpenters, chandeliers that glowed with candlelight. Each object told a story of luxury built on suffering. And for the enslaved, each task inside these walls, polishing floors, serving meals, cleaning chambers, was a daily reminder of a life stolen from them. But the Big House was also fragile in ways its owners couldn't see. It depended entirely on those it sought to control. Every brick was laid, every nail hammered, every meal cooked, every garment sewn by enslaved hands. Without that forced labor, the grandeur would collapse. That's why its destruction was so powerful. Burning the Big House wasn't just destroying property. It was destroying the illusion of permanence. It was tearing down the master stage, leaving behind ashes where power once paraded itself. Chapter 3. Life in Chains. Life on a South Carolina plantation in 1861 was marked by a rhythm of control, a cycle designed to break the human spirit while extracting every ounce of labor. Dawn didn't just bring sunlight. It brought the sound of overseers' calls, the crack of whips, and the knowledge that another day of backbreaking toil had begun. For the enslaved, there was no such thing as rest. Field hands bent under the weight of cotton sacks that tore into their shoulders. Women balanced the dual burden of endless work and the constant threat of exploitation. Children, often no older than 7 or 8, were expected to carry water, herd animals, or sweep floors, their childhoods stolen before they could even begin. Nights offered little relief. Cabins were cramped, often little more than wooden shacks with dirt floors, shared by entire families. Food was sparse, usually cornmeal or scraps discarded from the master's table. Clothing was rough, often the same tattered garments worn year after year. But beyond the physical hardship was the constant weight of fear. Punishments could be swift and brutal, whipping, shackling, or worse, inflicted for the smallest perceived act of disobedience. The threat of families being torn apart through sale hung over every conversation, every bond of love, and yet, even in chains, resilience thrived. Enslaved people found ways to preserve fragments of humanity, singing spirituals at night, telling stories by firelight, passing down traditions in whispers. These acts weren't just culture. They were survival, quiet forms of defiance against a system that sought to erase them. It was within this world of unrelenting control and hidden strength that the seeds of rebellion grew. For one woman, fire would become the language of her resistance. Chapter 4. Sparks of Rebellion. Rebellion on a plantation didn't always look like fire and smoke. More often it lived in the shadows, in small, quiet acts that seemed insignificant to outsiders but carried enormous weight for those who risked everything to commit them. Sometimes it was as subtle as working slower in the fields, dragging out tasks to claim a few stolen moments of rest. Other times it meant breaking a tool or feigning illness, small disruptions that chipped away at the master's carefully orchestrated system of control. Food was hidden, messages were passed, and songs were sung with double meanings, spirituals that disguised instructions for escape or reminders of freedom. But rebellion also carried heavier risks. Poison was one of the most feared weapons in the South. Masters often suspected their food or drink might be tainted, leading them to distrust even the hands that served them. Fires, too, haunted their thoughts. Barns, storage sheds, or fields set ablaze under the cover of night. Each flame was a reminder that control was never as complete as they believed. The slaveholders knew this. Their paranoia grew with every rumor, every whisper of uprising. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, though decades earlier, still lingered like a scar in the Southern mind, fueling fear that another organized revolt could ignite at any time. For the enslaved, these acts of defiance were more than anger. They were messages that even under chains and watchful eyes, the human spirit could resist. And in 1861, one woman's act would rise above all these whispers. She wouldn't just slow the system or break it piece by piece. She would strike at its heart, setting fire to the very house that embodied her oppression. Chapter 5. The mysterious woman history rarely records the names of enslaved women who fought back. Their stories, when they survive at all, are fragments, whispers in newspapers, notes in plantation journals, rumors passed through generations. The woman who set the big house ablaze in 1861 is no different. Her name was erased, but her actions refused to disappear. What do we know about her? Very little with certainty. She may have been a house servant, trusted enough to move freely inside the master's home. That access would have given her knowledge of the rooms, the routines, the vulnerable places where a spark could take hold. Others suggest she was a field hand, less visible in the household but carrying deep resentment built from years of labor and loss. What we can say is that she lived under constant duress. Like every enslaved person, her daily life was shaped by exploitation and fear. Perhaps she had seen family sold away. Perhaps she herself had suffered brutal punishment. Perhaps she simply carried the weight of a lifetime of indignity. Any of these could have planted the seed of rebellion. What sets her apart is not that she felt anger, countless others did, but that she acted. She crossed the dangerous threshold from thought to deed. To set fire to the big house was to declare war on the very system that sought to crush her. It wasn't only an act of destruction, but a statement. Your power is not absolute. And then came the most haunting part of her story. She didn't stay to be caught, punished, or made into an example. She vanished, as if swallowed by the smoke, leaving behind not only ashes, but also a mystery that has lingered for over 160 years. Chapter 6. The plan of fire like this doesn't start by accident, and it certainly doesn't spread with such precision without thought behind it. Though the details of her preparation are lost to time, we can imagine how carefully the woman must have planned her strike. She likely studied the rhythms of the big house, when the family dined, when servants cleared the rooms, when candles were extinguished, and when silence fell across the halls. Every moment was a calculation. To set the blaze too early risked discovery. Too late, and it might be put out before it took hold. The choice of fire itself was deliberate. Matches, smoldering coals, or even an oil lamp could have been her tools. Fire was both weapon and symbol, fast, destructive, and impossible to ignore. Unlike poison or blade, which targeted individuals, flames consumed everything, striking at the very structure that defined her bondage. She also had to think of her escape. How could she vanish when the chaos erupted? The surrounding woods offered cover. Rivers and swamps, though treacherous, could conceal footprints and scent. Perhaps she relied on help, allies among the enslaved community, or even whispers of the Underground Railroad extending further south than most records suggest. What makes her plan remarkable is not only its success, but its silence. No one reported seeing her strike the match. No overseer caught her in the act. By the time suspicion turned toward her, she was already gone. It was a plan that required not just courage, but brilliance. An enslaved woman, denied every freedom. Orchestrating the downfall of the house meant to symbolize her master's control. The big house would burn, and she would not be there when the ashes cooled. Chapter 7. The firestorm. When the first flames burst into the night, the reaction was instant and chaotic. The big house, once thought of as indestructible, groaned like a wounded giant. Smoke poured from the windows, curling upward in thick black plumes that could be seen for miles. The fire moved with terrifying speed, feeding on polished wood floors, curtains, and the dry summer air. The master's family stumbled into the yard, their nightclothes lit by the fire's glow. Shouts of panic echoed across the plantation. Orders were screamed, but few were followed. Buckets of water sloshed uselessly against walls already swallowed by heat. Every effort to fight the blaze seemed pitiful, like trying to stop a storm with bare hands. For the enslaved, the fire was more than disaster. It was a spectacle of justice. Many were forced into frantic bucket lines, but others stood still, eyes fixed on the inferno. The big house, the very heart of their oppression, was crumbling before them. Some may have quietly prayed. Others may have hidden smiles in the flickering shadows. The firestorm left no room for doubt. Doors collapsed, the roof caved in, and the columns that once stood as symbols of power cracked and tumbled into the rubble. Within an hour, the grand house was gone, reduced to glowing embers and ash. But perhaps the most haunting image wasn't the house collapsing. It was the absence of the woman who lit it. While the family wailed and overseers scrambled, she was already beyond reach. No one saw her slip away. No one knew which path she took. In the chaos, her escape was hidden, perfectly timed, as though the flames themselves had swallowed her whole. Chapter 8. Vanishing into smoke. The fire consumed more than just the big house. It consumed certainty. When the smoke cleared, one question lingered louder than the crackling embers. Where had she gone? Some claimed she fled into the woods, using the chaos as cover. Thick forests stretched for miles, offering a labyrinth where dogs and overseers could easily lose the scent. Others whispered she had slipped into the swamps, vanishing into the muck and reeds where no one dared follow too far. Swamps had always been both graveyard and sanctuary, unforgiving, but protective for those who knew how to move through them. Then came the rumors of allies. Could she have been guided northward, toward networks of resistance that extended further than plantation owners admitted? The Underground Railroad is most often remembered in the Upper South, but scattered safe houses, free black communities, and sympathetic pockets existed even here. Perhaps someone was waiting. Perhaps her escape wasn't as solitary as it seemed. What makes her disappearance remarkable is how complete it was. Plantation owners were obsessed with control, with making examples of rebellion. Yet in this case, there was no body, no captured fugitive paraded in chains. She was simply gone. For the enslaved community, this absence was more powerful than any trial or execution. She became a ghost story, a legend whispered in hushed voices. The woman who struck at the master's heart and walked free into the night. Her vanishing unsettled the white families far more than her fire. If one enslaved woman could disappear so completely after such defiance, who else might be planning? Who else might already be watching, waiting, ready to act? Chapter 9. The Aftermath. When dawn broke over the plantation, the big house was nothing but smoldering ruins. The once grand columns lay cracked and broken, the fine furniture reduced to ash, the silverware warped in the heat. What remained was not just physical destruction, but a wound to the very pride of the master's household. The reaction was swift and brutal. Enslaved people across the South faced harsher surveillance after stories of the fire spread. Plantation owners saw the blaze as proof of their worst fears, that rebellion simmered under every obedient nod, every bowed head. Patrols tightened, curfews hardened, and punishments grew more violent. For the enslaved community on that plantation, the aftermath was a storm of suspicion. Overseers interrogated men and women alike, demanding answers no one would give. Whispers of torture and public punishments followed, all designed to reassert dominance and warn others against daring the same. But even through fear, a quiet pride flickered. Someone had struck a blow that no whip could erase. Beyond the plantation, news of the blaze traveled fast. Local papers recorded it with tones of outrage and paranoia, blaming ungrateful servants and warning landowners to be vigilant. Yet in those same words of condemnation lay a confession. The system was not unshakable. The Civil War was only months away. In that tense climate, the fire symbolized something larger than one act of defiance. It became part of a growing storm, a reminder that the institution of slavery was not only immoral but unstable, threatened from within by those it sought to suppress. And still, the greatest wound to the master's pride remained unsolved. The woman who set the fire was gone, leaving behind a silence louder than the flames. Chapter 10. Legacy of Fire. The fire that consumed the big house was more than an isolated act of vengeance. It was a spark that illuminated a truth long buried beneath the South's polished verandas and manicured fields. That slavery was never stable, never secure. Beneath the surface, it was always fragile, always at risk of collapse from the very people it sought to control. The unnamed woman's act became more than just rebellion. It became legend. Though her name was lost, her defiance echoed in whispers, stories, and fears that rippled across the region. For enslaved people, she represented possibility, proof that even within chains, there was room for resistance. For slaveholders, she was a nightmare made real, a reminder that their wealth and power could vanish overnight in smoke and ash. Her story also carries weight for us today. Fire in her hands was more than destruction. It was transformation. It consumed a house that stood as a monument to human suffering and left behind only ruins, a blank space where domination once reigned. In that sense, her blaze was not just an ending, but a rebirth. A reminder that power built on cruelty cannot last forever. And then there is her disappearance. Did she find freedom, living out her days beyond the reach of her master's grasp? Or did she vanish in the swamps, her body never found but her story immortalized? We may never know, yet the uncertainty is part of her power. She remains untouchable, a ghost in the history of the South, unpunished, unbroken, unforgettable. The big house is gone. The records are silent, but the legend endures. The enslaved woman who burned her master's world to the ground and walked into history on her own terms. History has a way of silencing voices it doesn't want us to hear. Yet sometimes, even in the gaps and silences, the echoes are too loud to ignore. The enslaved woman who set fire to the big house may remain nameless in the record books, but her act of defiance carved itself into history. She showed that even when the odds seemed impossible, resistance was still possible. If this story moved you, share it. Because the past isn't just dates and places. It's human lives, choices, and courage. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment. What do you think happened to her after that night of fire and smoke?